Welcome to episode number 47 of the First Responder Wellness Podcast. My name is Conrad Weaver, and I'm so glad you decided to join us today. I hope you are doing well and that you're taking care of yourself and all the people around you. And I hope you're thriving and prospering in the goals that you have set for this year. Hey, my goal is to bring you content that you can use in your journey to wellness, whether you're a first responder or whether you're just a regular citizen and you're listening to this. I want you to live a healthy and vibrant and prosperous life. And that's why I bring you these conversations that will give you some tools and ideas to help you live your best life. Today, my guest is Chief Chad Depew. Chad has been a police officer since 2001 and is currently the chief of police for a hospital system in Southwest Ohio. During his law enforcement career, Chad has served as a police officer, patrol sergeant, and canine handler. In our conversation, we talk about the importance of investing in the mental, physical, and spiritual well-being of first responders. Chad encourages all first responders who are people of faith to invest in their spiritual well-being and find support within the Christian community. Chad also extends an invitation to those without faith to give it a try and explore the hope and fulfillment it can bring. So stay tuned for this interesting and inspiring conversation. Hey, I hope you're enjoying listening to or watching this podcast and that you're getting something out of it. And I'd love to hear from you. Your comments or your thoughts on what you're experiencing is important to me. So send me an email or leave me a comment in the YouTube channel or on Apple Podcasts. That would mean a lot to me. And please subscribe. I promise I'll do everything I can to continue to bring you content that matters to you. And when you subscribe, invite your tribe, your friends, your family, your coworkers to join in as well. Share the links. Let's get more people listening so that we can have a greater impact on the world around us. Thanks again for listening. And now here's my conversation with Chad Depew. Well, Chad, welcome to the First Responder Wellness Podcast. It's so great to connect with you and to have you on the program.
Conrad, I appreciate it. Excited to be here. Been listening to some of the podcasts today, actually. So really blessed to be a part of some high caliber content and some really good speakers you've had here before.
Yeah, well, thank you. It's this has been a fun deal for me just to connect with first responders. As you know, I'm not a first responder, but I love connecting with our first responder friends from all over. So tell us a little bit about who you are and what do you do?
My name's Chad Depew. I'm a police chief here in Southwest Ohio, the Dayton, Ohio area. And, wanted to spend a little bit of our time today talking about my nonprofit and the work we do there through, it's called Heroic Deeds Nonprofit. And really, our goal is to invest in the mental, physical, and spiritual well-being of first responders. So we want to take those wellness and resiliency conversations that are already happening and add faith to the mix.
Well, that's such an important topic, and I want to get into that. But let's talk a little bit about your journey. Yeah. What led you into law enforcement? What has your experience been really in the area of mental health and wellness within the law enforcement community?
Yeah, it's such a loaded question, right? And it's funny, it's almost tough to answer that question unless you have some perspective on your career. I look back, I just always knew I wanted to be a cop from the time, certainly from about middle school age and definitely on. I just always knew what I wanted to do. And, we talk about mental health. So I went to police academy back in 2001, and that was not a topic in the academies. Let's put it that way, right? So, taught by, field training officers officers training me rather, who, grew up in the 70s and 80s of law enforcement where you're just kind of told to suck it up and move on to the next call, right? Mm-hmm. So officer well-being was not even a term back then. And, it's funny when you're young, you always think, well, that'll never be me. Mm-hmm. You see the veteran officers, whether it's cops or firefighters, who have those struggles, whether it be struggles with addiction, struggles with PTS, failed marriages. You see those things and you think that'll never be me, right? Mm-hmm. Until it is you. Mm-hmm. And one thing that always served me really well throughout my career, even early, I've just always been just strong in my faith. Thankfully grew up in a Christian home, had those positive influences around me. My dad was a probation officer, later was an executive director of a correctional facility. So I kind of, grew up watching him working in that space already as a Christian man. So he did a phenomenal job just setting that example. So honestly, I kind of didn't know any better. I always knew I wanted to be a cop and knew that I was a Christian, but I really wasn't prepared for the conflict with being a Christian, both the fact that it just wasn't necessarily an acceptable topic of conversation when you're at the police department, and just kind of the attacks on you for being a Christian, whether it be officers trying to get you to do things you probably shouldn't do, whether it's through drinking, carrying on, those type of things, or just even the folks you interact with. Once they find out you're a Christian, they just really try to hone in on that and make that an area of attack. So you really got to be realistic. I think entering the field as a Christian to understand that'll be part of it. That I'm a firm believer that I don't know how somebody could be a cop and not be a Christian. Because some people will ask that question. Well, how could you be a Christian and be a cop? I'm like, well, I don't know how you could be one without being a Christian, because I'm not sure where I would be without my faith. But again, going back to early in my career, working as a patrol officer, canine officer, was a sergeant at a fairly young age. What I went from being young and new to thinking, I'll never end up like those guys, right? Those guys who are cynical, jaded, chip on their shoulder, or just the paranoid veteran officer who never leaves home without his gun, which is me now, by the way, like fully admit. But it just slowly happens as you deal with darkness, you deal with trauma, you deal with death, you deal with all these things day in and day out. It really shades your perspective and shades your outlook. And for me, it really became something where I found myself, because we work in a command and control type environment, when there's chaos happening, you call 911, the cops and firefighters roll up, and we just settle things down. That's what we do. So you do enough of that, and just talking from a Christian perspective, kind of without even me recognize it, I started to lean on my own understanding more than leaning on Christ, right? Mm-hmm. Thinking that, well, I'm able to maintain, some good mental health and strengthen resiliency because of me, right? I'm just that tough of a guy. And when you start having those thoughts, you start to leave God out of it. So that was a wake-up call for me, because what started happening, I started putting barriers between myself and Christ as my career went on, just completely not realizing it. And so, it just goes back to how from just a Christian perspective, we always have to be on guard. And certainly when we talk about wellness and mental health as first responders, we have to be on guard, like, truly head on a swivel. It's a term we use in law enforcement, meaning, to watch your back, keep yourself safe. But we have to keep ourselves safe from the psychological battles, the mental health battles that are happening, and just always be on guard for those things that could be detrimental to our life or to our families, for that matter.
I think it's important to realize that just putting on the faith, putting on that Christian lifestyle doesn't shield you from the mental health challenges that law enforcement, first responders can bring, right? Can you speak to that?
Absolutely. Because we just aren't really prepared. No academy, no church or faith is really going to prepare you for the trauma that you experience. Mm-hmm. One of the questions that I see a lot of first responders asking, first responders who aren't Christians, they'll tell me stories of just stories of maybe a young child dying or some type of real tragedy happening. Mm-hmm. And they'll get stuck because they think, well, if God is real and there's a loving God, why does he allow those things to happen? Mm-hmm. And even as a Christian, as you go into those situations, see more and more of those, you really start to be conflicted yourself, because you deal with those things day in and day out. It makes you start to question your own faith, right? And those can become battles. And the other battle is, I referenced going back to the academy in 2001. We're almost taught at an very early stage of our career that we have to wear a mask. And that mask is that everything's okay, that we're fine, give me the next call, I can handle it. So we're told to wear this mask, and you wear that mask long enough, it starts to become your reality, to where you feel like you're always on duty, you feel like the darkness and the danger that you deal with continually is all that there is. And it really starts to shade your perspective, and it takes just a mental and psychological toll on you. Whereas now, we have a better understanding of that, what, we have to take off that mask. We have to recognize that sometimes it's okay to not be okay. That, what, I saw this, I dealt with it, kind of messed me up. I got questions about it, and I just need to either, whether it's, spend some time in prayer about it, talking to some other people with similar experiences. But, we now know that it's necessary to have a healthy career and just to be a healthy individual to take off that mask and make sure that we're doing okay.
When in your career did you notice that conversation started happening more frequently?
I would say those conversations were starting to happen maybe about 10 years ago. And again, that's just from my perspective, where we started recognizing that, hey, there's something to this officer well-being. It's okay that if officers are seeing things that they don't understand or seeing things that really troubles them, that it's okay if they start to seek help. So this conversation started happening where we were saying that it was okay or claiming that it was okay. But what we still saw is officers who had the fortitude to, what, I'm going to go talk to a counselor or a therapist. They were labeled, right? Because that's part of the stigma is that if I seek treatment or I admit that I have troubles with those things, we have this belief that means we are now psychologically somehow disabled to be a first responder. When in reality of the situation is we've experienced something unhealthy and we're just getting ourselves healthy again. So even though we started having those conversations, recognizing that, yeah, we believe that stuff's good and we believe there's time and a place for it, we still weren't advocating for people to actually follow through and actually do it. I've sat in meetings with police leaders on these very conversations talking about how, it should be okay if an officer, needs to have a psychological evaluation just for their own well-being, not even a fit for duty situation, that they should be allowed to do it. But I've heard police chiefs say, yeah, but I should get those results, right? And my statement is, no, chief, you shouldn't get those results, right? We don't get all their medical charts when they go to the family doctor, these checkups, these visits. Mental health should be no different, right? As long as they're getting the help they need, and we have some faith, whether it's through medical intervention or sometimes, of course, I speak a lot about faith. Sometimes just having some time in prayer or with biblical counselor, just having the time to work through it is extremely helpful. So we need to not only say that it's okay for those interventions to happen, but we need to, step up and put our words into action with it.
Do you think that it's really comes down to leadership and kind of a leadership problem that this idea of mental health wellness hasn't been as quickly adopted as it should be?
You get asked that question a lot, and I think in some cases that may be a part of it, but really I think it's just a part of the culture. Part of the culture is that I need to be physically strong, I need to be mentally strong, and that if I show weakness in any of those areas, then I'm now perceived as weak. I feel that I'm weak, so I can't admit that I'm having struggles in those areas, and that's just part of our culture. And yes, when we're talking police officers, firefighters, medics, corrections officers, we want those people to be physically strong, mentally fit, right? That's an expectation that we have. When if my life's in danger, I want to see somebody who looks like Arnold Schwarzenegger in his prime coming to rescue me, right?
Sure.
So we have that expectation. So I think culturally, it's just ingrained in us, maybe through some personal beliefs or maybe even through some peer-to-peer interactions or even some societal expectations that we have to be tough, we have to be strong. And again, that's where that first mask comes on, that we're expected to be this thing. And so not only do I think it's cultural in public safety circles that we feel that if we show vulnerability or weakness that we are now somehow impaired to serve. I mean, the reality of it is society feels the same way. You can scroll through social media and see these memes of unhealthy police officers that people are poking fun of, right? There's this
Mm-hmm.
societal expectation that we are somehow mentally bulletproof and physically bulletproof when that's just not the case. So I
Mm-hmm.
think, a lot of things have to shift. There's different expectations, I think, societally for the general public than we do our first responders and veterans.
Mm-hmm.
What's wrong with saying, our first responders, veterans, even active duty military, they need help sometimes too, and that's okay. So I think it's just a
Mm-hmm.
shift of that mindset. And I think for first responders specifically, we just have to be willing to step up and be leaders in those conversations. And like I said earlier, just really set the tone of, okay, we're going to recognize what's important, and we're going to put this mental health as a priority, and we're going to create pathways for our team members to be healthy.
Mm-hmm. So, as a person of faith, I know historically in church communities around the country, and especially some of the people that I've been involved with in the past, having some kind of mental health issues can be looked as a spiritual problem only.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So, how do you reconcile that?
You know, um, I'm a firm believer. First of all, being a Christian, I believe that God can heal us of anything, but I also believe God gave us like good medicine, good people, good therapists too, right? And it's
Sure.
okay. Sometimes, even though God can cure cancer, doesn't mean we still maybe have to go through some treatments and radiation, right?
Hmm.
So mental health's no different. So even though I believe there's a spiritual element to it, I think it's okay to get healthy in a variety of ways. I think we are short-sighted if we leave spirituality and our faith out of that conversation, which
Hmm.
is what we've seen happening initially. Now, again, that sounds like a criticism. It's not really a criticism. When we started having those conversations, the main focus was on the clinical aspects, the psychological impacts, and we're talking government agencies, right? Whether it's
Hmm.
first responders or military service, which, that separation of church and state. So just kind of by default, we weren't really talking about faith. But
Hmm.
now we have data to support that there is something to this thing called faith and mental health. So the military started recognizing it sooner, really, than a lot of government entities. And so now we're able to have those talks. But yeah, I'm a firm believer that there are a variety of methods to be healthy. I think faith should be the cornerstone of that. But if somebody also needs, medical intervention, medication, whatever that may be, to become healthy, I think it's perfectly fine. And again, that goes
Hmm.
back to that stigma. When it comes to first responders, that's one of those fears. Maybe I'll cross that threshold to go see a counselor or a therapist, but I'm not going to take that medication because what if somebody finds out I'm taking, anxiety
Hmm.
medication or whatever it may be? I'll be labeled
Hmm.
as an officer or a
Hmm.
firefighter as unable to perform my job. When not only is that not the case, that shouldn't be the fear that they have because those are barriers for them to do the things they need to do to become healthy.
Hmm. In your experience, have you seen a difference between those officers who are people of faith, who have a faith journey, and those who don't? Is there a significant enough difference there in their mental health experience?
Yeah, like we said earlier, being a Christian or having a faith is not going to 100% shield you from that trauma or from that PTS. I want to be clear
Hmm.
about that up front. However, I think having that faith perspective does help us make more sense of some
Hmm.
situations. When we see the death, we see the tragedy, because of my faith, I at least will firmly believe, I cannot make sense of why this happened, but I trust God knows why it happened. So just that small facet of belief alone, just believing that God's in control, that everything happens for a reason, gives me peace. And,
Hmm.
I couldn't imagine going throughout my career and seeing and experiencing some of those things without having that belief. I
Hmm.
say all the time, if but not for the grace of God, I'd probably be one of those people law enforcement is dealing with, right?
Hmm.
Because it's just so hard to make sense of some of those things, and that's where that Christian background is just so tremendously helpful. And I wanted to read here. I got it pulled up quickly. Just made me think of a verse in First Peter chapter 5, verses 6, 7, and 8, where it says, "Therefore, humble yourselves under the mighty hand of God, that he may exalt you in due time, casting all your care upon him, for he cares for you. Be sober, be vigilant, because your adversary the devil walks about like a roaring lion, seeking whom he may devour." And I just love that verse because in verse 7 it says, "Cast your cares upon him." So those times in my career where I just, I couldn't make sense of why this happened, because, when you see those things, it's hard to deal with.
Sure.
But just truly believing, in my heart and soul that I can cast this care upon God and he's got it worked out. He's in the details. Somehow he'll be glorified through this. I may never know how or why I'd be privy to, how that manifests, but I truly believe it. And just without that belief, I think people start to lose hope. And so that's where I say, Christian first responders that I know, I think they still have that hope that, I don't understand this, but they have that belief and hope that God does, and God will use it somehow for his kingdom. I see that as a key difference. Now, like I said, plenty of Christians first responders still have the same anxiety, PTS, all those things. Don't get me wrong. But I think that having that eternal perspective, that belief in God is in all the details, really, really helps when you're dealing with those tragedies, those deaths, those traumatic impacts, those traumatic situations, rather.
So, as a leader in your department, in your agency, how do you how do you work with those who perhaps are on the opposite side of that, or perhaps agnostic or even atheist? How do you deal with that kind of perhaps even antagonism toward your faith?
Yeah, and that's one of the reasons why we actually started our nonprofit. One of our goals is to make it acceptable to talk about your faith at the firehouses, at the PDs, because that's not always the case. And I've seen that firsthand. Because again, a lot of these first responders go through their careers and they develop that cynical mentality. Their hearts, become hardened. It's really tough to have those conversations with those people. And to be fair, in a lot of ways, they've earned that hardness. They've experienced awful things, and it's taken a toll on them. But those conversations can be hard. What I've learned is I think that ministry of presence is so important. And that's how we train chaplains, just to have that ministry of presence. I may not, work along some officers, and I may not ever come out and overtly say, I'm a Christian and I want you to be too. But hopefully they'll see, through the way I operate, the way I talk, the way I act, they'll see that, that guy, I heard he's a Christian, I heard he goes to church, and there's something different. So I think that ministry of presence is so important. And developing those relationships with those officers that are, just maybe struggling or just who aren't Christians. I think that approach is so important. First responders and police officers especially, we're not very trusting of a lot of people, and we fear change, even though we deal with these dramatic situations that can change from second to second. In general, in our own lives, we don't necessarily like change. And so I think just, letting those others see that you're just willing to love them, walk alongside them, not be judgmental of them is so important. I think that goes a long way with them to, them piquing that curiosity of, hey, what church do you go to, right? And maybe lead to further conversations, maybe church invitations, Bible studies, those type of things. But you really have to just show them, I'm here to love you and walk alongside you and, be that kind of disciple in their lives.
Have you seen any type of like Bible studies or groups come together within the first responder community, and how has that been effective?
I'm starting to see more of that pop up. And, it seems like I feel right now, more so than any point in my career, I see first responders who are just kind of fed up. They're fed up with a lot of different things, with, that stereotype on their mental health and wellness being part of it. They're fed up with being judged in the media. They're just kind of fed up, right? And I think for those reasons, at least I see, these pockets, these Bible studies and things popping up because I think it has emboldened a lot of these first responders to be more vocal about their faith. You know what? I'm a Christian, deal with it, right? It doesn't change our interactions. I have your back on every call that we take, but that's becoming more of a normalized part of the conversation. And I think that's healthy. At least in the Dayton, Ohio area, I see it. I'm blessed to attend two separate Bible studies a week that involve nearly 100% first responders. So I'm starting to see more and more of that. And again, I think that really it speaks to the heart and mindsets of our first responders out there. They're looking for something more. They're tired of being sick and tired, so to speak, right? They're looking for that change, looking to be healthy, be happy, looking to have just that wholeness in their lives, healthy relationships with themselves, with their spouses, family. So I really feel first responder hearts are just really primed for these movements to take place.
What do you say to the officer, perhaps, that's serving? He or she's a Christian, but they can't find someone else within their department, within their community
Yeah,
that's has the same faith. What would you say to them?
that can be tough. And sometimes we feel like we're on an island because, depending on the size of your department, they may be the only Christian there. And not every church has like a first responder, outreach program. So that can be really tough. That's, hopefully through some maybe Google searches, they can connect to folks, but there's places, guys like Jeremy Wade at Mission First are doing great work to really fill that void that, I want to find other like-minded Christians, other people I can talk to because they're out there and there's a lot of them out there. And like I said, they're being a little more bold and, admitting that part of their lifestyle, that this is who I am without that fear of judgment or retaliation. There's some really good Facebook groups popping up out there. You have big name outreaches like the Billy Graham Ministries. And there are churches, you go to some of these bigger churches, they'll have first responder outreach ministries there. And you don't have to attend that church to be a part of that ministry. Maybe that means they host a Bible study that has first responders that are church members and non-church members. So I'd really encourage people in that situation to just look for those resources in those areas. And like I said, big churches are a good place to start. Or, they can always reach out to, if they have a county police chiefs association, those groups are generally pretty well connected with those type of things happening in the area.
I know last year, I think in 2023, we had a screening event in Southern California, actually at Saddleback Church, and they used that event to launch their support group for first responders. It's not necessarily a full-on Bible study, per se, but it's a support group. And so they have law enforcement, they have fire departments, they have other people coming in the first responder community coming there to their church, to this event, to this weekly meeting where they can just be themselves.
Excellent.
And the guy who runs it, he told me, yeah, we have to keep the door shut because sometimes the conversation isn't exactly what other people in the church would,
Correct.
The language maybe isn't quite all there, but it's okay because, they're coming and they're showing interest and they're getting help for the things that they're struggling with.
They're showing up, right? They're showing up. And that's such a big part of it. And that's part of just tearing down some of those fears and insecurities. Sometimes it just takes showing up, walking in the doors of the church or the doors of the meeting, just showing up, starting somewhere. And it's so important that when those groups pop up, that they are, that they consist only of first responders. Because, take that same group, if they threw just, somebody from the local bank in there or nurses from the local hospital, that those conversations and that banter wouldn't happen. First responders, I always say that we put the cult in culture, and we just have this level of comfort with other police officers, firefighters, COs, because we have the same and similar experiences. We get each other, we know what we've been through. And so there's just such a high level of trust in and among that group that if you bring just those people together, much more likely to have those conversations, to be vulnerable and let that guard down a little bit.
I know you're involved with the organization Heroic Deeds. I don't know, did you start that group? And if so, why? What does the group do and why?
Yeah, so it was in the spring of 2021. My brother, who is at the time a sheriff's deputy out in California, he and I were just kind of talking of just the state of not only law enforcement in general, but just some of the circles that we were in, him in Northern California, being here in Southwest Ohio. So again, spring of 2021. So think we're a year into COVID. We're a year past the riots, protesting, defund the police movement. In his area, they'd recently had an officer killed in the line of duty. In our area, we recently had an officer killed in the line of duty. We're just talking through those things and how just only in our circles, but we believe just largely that first responders in general at that time just kind of felt like they were being kicked in the gut. Not only judged in the media and all these things happening, but because of COVID, rioting and protesting, we saw this mass exodus from public safety begin to happen, particularly in law enforcement, where people were retiring in droves. They were just leaving the profession. And what that did, that left such a void behind for everybody still serving, to where now, I'm going through all these experiences. We've survived COVID. We're dealing with defund the police movement. But now we've lost 20% of our staffing. So we're all working mandatory overtime. So now we're not sleeping. It's impacting our family more. So just all these things were just continuing to compound. So he and I talked about it, and like, well, we're a half hour into this conversation. Like, what can we do about it? $1 million question. What can we do about it? And, shocker, we had no great answers, right? But what we did know, what we believed is that any solution that existed out there had to have Christ at the center. So we just got to talking about the wellness movement, both, police side, fire side, public safety in general, and how just from our background, our training, education, our experiences, that there's a lot of good things happening, both now and at the time, good things happening in that space of officer wellness, but Christ is being left out of the conversation. So he said, you know what, let's work on putting something together based on our training, our experiences, that's faith-focused. Let's talk about wellness and resiliency through the lens of faith. So what we did, so it started with an idea, and we thought, you know what, let's work on maybe putting a seminar, a conference, an event together. Before we did anything, I rallied a group of just local police chiefs, fire chiefs here in the Dayton, Ohio area, and kind of pitched the idea to them. Said, hey, this is what we're thinking. In your opinion, do you think there's a need? Basically, if we do this, a faith-centered wellness event for first responders, will anybody even show up, right? And overwhelmingly, they said yes. There's a need for that. People will show up. So we started laying the groundwork of, okay, I guess we're going to do a conference. So we started laying the groundwork of that together. We secured a venue, got some really good speakers, both locally and nationally known speakers. We met some great people along the way. And we held our first Responders in Faith conference in 2022. That's if I didn't say it already, that's the name of our event, the Responders in Faith Conference. So it's a faith-based wellness conference for all active and former first responders and first responder chaplains. And we very narrowly define first responders as police officers, firefighters, COs, medics, probation, parole, just everybody in that traditional first responder role, because we knew if we wanted to do this, we had to get it right. That if we were expecting these individuals to show up and in a vulnerable sense, talk and learn about their faith, and as it pertains to their mental health, they're not going to be open to those conversations if they're sitting next, to the ED nurse they'll see later that night on shift, right? So we very narrowly defined our target audience, and we put on that first event in 2022, and we had over 220 show up for our first one. And that really showed us the need. One of the key differences, again, is not only do we talk about faith in those conversations on, being mentally, physically, and spiritually fit, We really encourage their first responders to bring their spouse with them, or whoever they consider their support system. I remember last year, it really resonated with me. During our conference last year, I had four separate police officers, all young men, and brought their parents with them to our event.
Oh, wow.
Because, as we talk about these issues of health and wellness, and again, there's some great stuff being done out there. But another limitation to agency-sponsored training and education is that it's for the employee, right?
Right.
And rightly so. We could debate whether or not tax dollars should be used for a police officer to bring their husband or wife with them. But generally that doesn't happen because funding is always a massive issue for these events anyway. So we really encourage to bring, whether it's husband, wife, boyfriend, girlfriend, mom, dad. I know some people brought like brother or sister with them because we want your family to learn these things with you. Because even though we may be diligent at the police department, hey, I'm gonna have your back, you have mine. Let's watch for these warning signs in each other. The reality of it is, to some degree, we always have that mask on when we're on duty. But our people at home, they know us better than anybody. They see us in those moments where we are off duty. They see the things that we do, when nobody's around, whether that be, officer maybe trying to medicate themselves with alcohol or whatever the case may be. Family's going to see those things, and they'll see them well before our buddies on duty will. So it's so important to bring family into those conversations. And even though at our first one in particular, I knew that to be important, it was so powerful to me to hear the feedback from the first responder spouses in particular. I had so many wives approach us, not only at the first one, but honestly, every one we do. So many wives just thank us for allowing them to come. Because, aside from the event that we do, I've only been married about 10 years now, but in that 10-year period, my wife's never gone to a training event with me, right? Never has. And that's true for most married first responders. So we had a lot of the wives in particular just thanking us for letting them experience that with their spouse. It deepens the spouse's understanding, right? That, hey, if my police officer husband comes home, throws a duty bag down, doesn't want to talk for a while, you know what? Maybe give him a little bit of space for a little while, Doesn't mean he's mad at her or doesn't want to be engaged in the family. Just maybe needs a few minutes to, take that mask off, right? So it's just such a learning environment for the nuclear family in those cases. I'll never forget, and this happened last year too. I had a young police officer come up to me. I'm kind of talking to some folks, and he's kind of standing there in my peripheral. So I finished this conversation, like, hey, how you doing? What do you think of the conference, type of thing? And he just kind of looked at me and he said, I didn't want to come here. I'm like, okay, nice to meet you, right? I didn't know what he was getting at, right? He said, I didn't want to come here. He said, my wife, she made me come here, and she dragged me to this thing. So, cool, thanks for sharing. But he said, I'm so thankful that she did. He said, we've been married only 3 years. And I started in law enforcement as soon as we got married. And one of our ongoing fights is that she's telling me that I'm changing because I'm a cop. And I get so angry at her, telling her that I'm not changing. I'm still the same person that I was. And he said, look at my arm. And I looked, he had, the really cool cop tattoos, the thin blue line, and, all kinds of stuff that's, kind of genre specific for cops. I'm like, yeah, cool tattoos, right? He said, you don't understand. He said, before I started being a police officer, I had 0 tattoos. He said, not there's anything wrong with tattoos, but that's part of police culture. So here I am telling my wife, nothing about me's changed. I'm the same person. So I'm marking my body full of, police items. He said, that just hit me like a ton of bricks today. And so having her with him there, them learning together, was, just a big benefit for their marriage. So that part is so important. And, I think it's often overlooked, but even more than overlooked, I think there's just limitations, again, through some of programs agencies are due, because, if an agency has a choice of, well, we either do this training for our staff, do it as best we can, or, try to include the family, which will cost a bunch more money, and just not do it at all. they should just do it for the staff, right? There's nothing
Mm-hmm.
wrong with that, but that's where we try to fill those gaps. It's our nonprofit. We're not using tax dollars to make sure we're including the family in everything that we do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's so key to include the family. I know just in my own life, my wife's a school administrator, and I listen to her stories coming home and the things that she does, and sometimes, you know, it would be great to be able to understand better what she does and the
Mm-hmm.
things that she experiences, and so I can imagine that's the same, within first responder community, because oftentimes
Yeah,
you don't have those same experiences, and so it's
yeah.
important.
And I tell you, some of that old mentality in police and fire culture. I heard this early on, well before I was married, is that when you see bad things, you don't take it home. You don't tell your family, you don't tell your wife, because you're not supposed to take that trauma and dump it on them. Well, I got news for everybody. Hiding that side of your life
Mhm,
and not talking to your spouse about it is far more damaging than saying, you know what, I saw some bad stuff today. I'm not going to
mhm,
go into all the gory details, but here's what I dealt with, and
mhm,
it impacted me. Those conversations will be so much significantly more meaningful to your spouse than giving the cold shoulder,
mhm,
because that's when silence exists in a relationship. That's when paranoia sets in. People start to feel they're drifting apart. So that's again one of those things, just culturally we have to get over. And I'll speak to the men in particular. Guys, these ladies can be pretty tough. It's okay to tell
mhm,
your wife. Again, I'd spare some of the gory details, but please tell if you're having a bad day or saw something that's impacted you. You got to share that, because
mhm.
she'll be there to support you, and that'll further help her understand maybe some of your mood or quietness or even tiredness after you have that adrenaline dump from being in that state of hypervigilance.
So at a conference we had the other week, we had a speaker, and I forget the three different steps, but they said they were, when you're coming home to your spouse, and you should have planned ahead of time to let them know that they will let you know. Do you want all the details? Do you want just a few of the details, or do you want just the highlights? You know,
Yeah,
and I think that's important
that's
to.
good.
It was really good to hear that. It says, if you know that ahead of time, you know how much to divulge, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
Mm,
absolutely. It's when we start giving our significant others, again, whoever that support system is, if that's spouse, that's mom or dad, if you start giving them silent treatment, it means
mm,
you're shoving them out of that part of your
mhm,
life, and that's when separation happens. And it's unfortunate because especially to people who are married or in serious relationships, we're excluding the most important person in our life,
mhm,
the person who will be there long after our career is over. And I think sometimes we take that for granted.
mhm. So, as we wrap up here, speak to that officer, that first responder who is a person of faith, and they feel alone.
That's tough. I would say be encouraged. You're not alone, and make sure that you are just investing in yourself spiritually. You got to have that foundation. I always suggest, as a Christian, whether you're a first responder or not, spend time daily reading your Bible. Make it a habit, make it repetitive, and also spend time praying. We live in a very regimented line of work.
Mhm,
If that means you have to put a half hour, 5 minutes on your calendar every day to read your Bible and pray, make sure you do it, because when we give ourselves that time with God, it gives Him time to work in us. We can't say that I'm a Christian. I'm casting this care to God, like we read in First Peter a moment ago, yet spending zero time reading our Bibles and pray. So make sure that your foundation is strong in prayer and reading Scripture.
mhm,
And the other is, again, be encouraged. It's being that, having that ministry of presence and trying to be that light at the PD and firehouse, that can take a toll on you,
mhm,
because it's not always well received.
mhm,
But you have to have that faith that, what, God is calling me to help plant those seeds. He'll take care of the watering, He'll take care of everything else, but calling me to plant those seeds. And you just never know the impact you may have on somebody's life. Try to find other first responders who are Christians. If your department has a chaplain, that's obviously a great place to start. We're starting to see chaplains become much more common at our police and firehouses, which is incredible. That's a big area that my organization is investing in now, chaplain education and training, because these chaplains are boots on the ground. So if your organization has a chaplain, find that chaplain, see if they can connect you with maybe some other like-minded people. That's just so important because you recognize you're not alone, that there are other Christian first responders out there, that you have similar experiences, and you can really walk alongside one another. They can be the ones to support you through whatever you're going through too, maybe at times. So we would definitely encourage finding others who are also Christians working in that same space.
Mm-hmm. And now speak to that officer, that first responder who has no faith experience at all. What would you say to them?
Yeah. I would say give it a shot, right? What do you have to lose? When some of these, and of course, I know police officers more than any other, the first responder segment, but if you've struggled with mental health issues, trauma, if you've dealt with addiction, relationship issues, or maybe you've dealt with none of those, but are just generally are unhappy, don't have a sense of fulfillment, or feel a void, try it. Go to church, talk to that Christian officer or firefighter that you work with. Dust off that Bible, start reading it. I'm such a firm believer of just reading scripture, even if we don't fully understand everything that we're reading, just investing that time in ourselves, and specifically in time and spending time with God. He'll start talking to you. Mm-hmm. And so you got nothing to lose if you're not a Christian. And I always recommend somebody new, just start with one of the Gospels. And I'd say the Gospel of John is a great starting point. Mm-hmm. But no doubt that somebody who's not a Christian, at some point they'll fill that void or feel like there's something more, missing that sense of belonging, which is so prevalent in first responder culture, is that we associate our role with our identity. At some point, no matter how hard we try to fight it, it becomes who we are. I was certainly one of those. Early in my career, if you asked me where I worked, I may name the city that I worked with. I would never tell anybody I was a police officer, just because I was trying to wear two different hats, right? Two different face masks. After a while, it becomes hard to maintain, and you become what you work. And that can be done in a healthy way, but that could also take control to where you're that person on duty all the time. And that's where we start to see the damage start to occur. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I just really encourage those who aren't to find, again, a fellow Christian officer, find a group, or, find some online content that you could check out, because those are all good starting points.
And if you don't have a Bible, go to your phone and download the Bible app. There's been hundreds of millions of downloads, and there's a version that you will understand.
Exactly. Mm-hmm. It's that information is so readily available. There's such great content out there now. The Bible Project, there's a lot of great YouTube videos that, I don't ever claim I'm the smartest guy in the room. So you watch the YouTube video, it'll tell, scriptures of the Bible with cartoon drawings, right? That's more my speed. So there's just so many great things out there. And so you can find something that resonates with you. I'm always very clear when I talk to people, because even with our nonprofit with Heroic Deeds, we say we're faith-based. Our three tenets are mental, physical, and spiritual well-being. But when I talk faith and spirituality, I'm talking about the Christian faith and being connected to Christ, right? Mm-hmm. I'm not talking about all the other religions, all those other things. I'm always very clear of what I believe in and what I represent. Mm-hmm. But yeah, there's some great stuff out there, and I think first responders especially, I think very quickly they can start to find that hope. They can start to make sense of the tragedy and darkness that they've seen, and they can cast those cares on Christ and just surrender those things to Him, and ideally surrender their life to Him.
So do you guys have another conference in the works? Is it being planned?
We do, yeah. So our Responders in Faith Conference 2025 here in Dayton, Ohio area is March 7th and 8th, 2025. We are also working on our second annual chaplain conference.
Mm.
This year we had our first, we call it Shepherding the Sheepdogs, our chaplain conference. And we had 62 chaplains come through for our first time.
Mm.
So we're really getting more plugged into the first responder chaplain community. And we want to help train them, arm them, and equip them because, again, they're boots on the ground. They are those Christians, going to the police departments, the firehouses, being there when the chaos is happening, trying to be there during the tragedies, during all those dark times, but also just being there, them having that ministry of presence, just showing up. And maybe the officers want to talk to them, maybe not. They just need to be there. I've been so blessed with my previous agency. One of the chaplains that I had, I really had no idea the impact that he had on my police officers really until his funeral. Sadly, he got ill and passed away. But after his funeral, my officer shared with me that, they were calling him independently for a ride along, because they were having some marital problems, because they're maybe confused about something they read in the Bible or just having a hard time. Like they were really reaching out to him. Which was just so incredible. It really spoke to my heart. And, I didn't know those things because I never asked, right? It was none of my business, but him just willing to be there and build those relationships and connect with them meant so much to those officers. And so we'll do another chaplain conference next year as well. We don't have a date for that yet, but we're going to continue to try to create more training, education, and programs for our first responder chaplains as well.
Okay. Where can people learn more about all this?
So our website is just heroicdeeds.org, and we have all the details there on our website. It talks about who we are and what we do. We are a nonprofit started by two first responders, being my brother and I, and all the content that we do is faith-focused. We have some free devotionals on our website, devotions that we've written, devotions written by first responders, for first responders. Both those can be just read straight through. They're structured in a way that they can be used for like a 6-week Bible study. So some free resources there as well.
Awesome. Well, Chad, it's been great talking to you. It's great to hear what you guys are doing. And I'm grateful that you guys are making a difference in the lives of first responders. With your faith and with your work. And so I think that this is an important subject and an important thing that you guys are doing.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate that.
So, I look forward to getting this out there to the world, and
cool.
Hopefully I can maybe make the March 7th and 8th conference if you guys are
That'd be awesome.
willing to have me there.
Come out and set up a booth and stuff too. It'd be great to show your stuff.
Sure.
Yeah, it'd be great. Yeah, we'd love to have you.
Yeah, well, thanks so much for being on the program. And,
thank you
for what you're doing.
Good catching up with you.
All right. Thanks, Chad, for joining me today on the podcast. I look forward to coming to Ohio and joining you guys this coming spring. Thanks for the work that you're doing. Hey, be sure to check out the PTSD 911 screening events we're having around the country. We got a bunch of them coming up in the next few months. I look forward to connecting with many of you out there in person. And if you'd like to host an event, please visit our website, ptsd911movie.com, and fill out the screening form, and I'll get back to you right away. And thank you for listening and for watching. And remember, you are not alone. If you need someone to talk to and don't know where you can turn, you can always dial 988 for help. Until next time, be well, take care of yourself and those around you, and go out and do something great in the world.